Why would any society deliberately send children into freezing temperatures that can shut down skin, lungs, and judgment in minutes? Why expose boys, still learning how the world works, to conditions most modern adults would refuse outright? Why not protect them, shelter them, delay that kind of hardship until adulthood? And yet, despite how shocking this sounds to us now, Inuit tribes practiced this for generations. Not secretly, not with regret, but openly, intentionally, and with pride. The fact that this tradition survived for centuries forces an uncomfortable question. What did they understand about human strength that we've forgotten? To a modern brain, this doesn't compute. Today, care means insulation, safety standards, constant supervision, and minimizing discomfort at all costs. We equate love with protection and danger with failure. But in the Arctic, care meant something radically different. Cold wasn't an enemy, it was a teacher. Pain wasn't abuse, it was information. Comfort wasn't a goal, it was a liability. These were two completely different definitions of what it meant to prepare a child for life, shaped by two completely different realities. And this is where people get it wrong. This story is not about cruelty. It's not about punishment. And it's definitely not about some exaggerated, tough guy culture. What you're about to hear is about survival psychology, how the human nervous system adapts under pressure. It's about controlled exposure to hardship, guided by elders who understood fear, stress, and calm better than any modern textbook. Most of all, it's about how environment shapes behavior, identity, and mental toughness over time. This is the kind of story we explore on Ancient Paths of Men, not to glorify suffering, but to understand how strength was forged when failure was an option. The moment you understand the world Inuit tribes lived in, the question shifts. It stops being why would they do this, and becomes how could they afford not to. This was a place where mistakes didn't just hurt feelings or dent confidence. They ended lives. Exposed skin could freeze in minutes. Fingers could go numb before pain even registered. One wrong decision in the cold didn't teach a lesson later. It erased you immediately. In an environment like this, hesitation wasn't innocent. It was fatal. Then there was the darkness. Not metaphorical darkness, real, physical darkness that swallowed entire months of the year. Long stretches where the sun never rose, where shadows didn't move, and where time itself felt suspended. This wasn't just physically exhausting. It was psychologically brutal. Humans rely on light for mood, orientation, and emotional regulation. Take it away, and fear gets louder. Anxiety stretches longer. In that kind of darkness, the ability to stay mentally steady wasn't optional. It was survival equipment. Food scarcity was always there, like background radiation. Not dramatic famine every day, but constant uncertainty. You could hunt for hours and return with nothing. You could do everything right and still fail. That kind of pressure rewires how the brain handles disappointment. There were no stock shelves, no emergency rations waiting just in case. Every successful hunt mattered not just to the hunter, but to the children, elders, and families depending on that outcome. Hunger wasn't a crisis, it was a signal. And signals had to be read calmly. There were no rescue teams coming, no backup plans, no outside help. If something went wrong, the solution had to come from within the group, immediately. This reality shaped everything. Skills had to be learned early. Emotional regulation had to be automatic. You couldn't afford a generation that panicked under pressure and hoped someone else would fix it. Self-reliance was an ideology. It was physics. And this is why childhood was never separated from survival. Children weren't treated as future adults who would someday matter. They mattered now. They were current members of the group, learning in real time how life worked. Observation wasn't passive. It was preparation. From a young age, boys watched how hunters moved, how they conserved energy, how they stayed quiet, how they handled fear without broadcasting it. Responsibility wasn't delayed. It was layered gradually, carefully, and intentionally. Every person had a role, and every role mattered. Not in theory, in practice. When survival depends on coordination, there is no such thing as unimportant work. This created a powerful psychological effect. Children grew up knowing they were needed, not praised endlessly, not coddled, but relied upon. That sense of usefulness builds a kind of confidence no affirmation ever could. You don't need to be told you matter when your actions prove it daily. And through all of this, the Arctic itself was the instructor. Cold wasn't punishment, it was feedback. Hunger wasn't tragedy, it was information. Silence wasn't emptiness, it was training. The land corrected mistakes instantly and without emotion. Nature didn't explain itself. It didn't negotiate. It simply responded. Inuit culture didn't fight this reality. They aligned with it. And that alignment shaped how boys were taught to think, feel, and act long before they ever held a weapon or tracked prey. Once you understand the environment, the next question becomes unavoidable. Why were boys taken hunting so early? Not because of tradition for tradition's sake, but because hunting demanded the most unforgiving combination of skills in Inuit life. It meant long absences from shelter, often lasting hours or days. It meant exposure to temperatures that punished hesitation instantly. It meant making precise decisions, while cold drained fine motor control and fatigue clouded judgment. And above all, it meant emotional regulation under real danger. Hunting wasn't just labor, it was a psychological stress test. There was no modern language for gender roles or psychological specialization, but the reality was simple. Different tasks demanded different mental conditioning. Hunting required silence, restraint, patience, and an unusual tolerance for uncertainty. You could do everything right and still fail. That kind of work doesn't reward impulsiveness or emotional expression. It selects for calm. Boys were trained for this role, not because they were valued more, but because the role itself required early mental shaping to prevent catastrophic failure later. This is where mental strength overtook physical strength entirely. In the Arctic, raw muscle meant nothing without control. Panic caused reckless movement, which burned energy and accelerated heat loss. Hesitation wasted narrow windows of opportunity, turning a potential meal into an empty return. And overconfidence, misreading weather, overestimating endurance, ended expeditions permanently. Calm decision-making under stress wasn't admirable, it was mandatory. The boys who learned this early survived. The ones who didn't became liabilities the environment would eventually correct. And this brings us to the most misunderstood part of all. The goal was never bravery. Bravery is emotional. It spikes, it burns hot, and it fades fast. What they needed was emotional neutrality. Fear wasn't denied, it was acknowledged quietly, then set aside. Pain wasn't dramatized, it was noticed, then managed. Hunters didn't seek danger or hype themselves up. They moved forward without internal noise. That neutrality is what kept hands steady, eyes sharp, and decisions clean when conditions turned hostile. By learning this young, boys didn't grow into men who chased fearlessness. They grew into men who expected fear and functioned anyway. Emotional control wasn't framed as strength, it was framed as normal. This is the psychological through line that ancient paths of men exist to explore. Not domination, not bravado, but the quiet systems ancient cultures used to produce stable, capable men in unstable worlds. That understanding led naturally to how early the process began. Not suddenly, not violently, and never without guidance, but earlier than most modern minds are comfortable imagining. From the outside, it looks extreme. From the inside, it was simply preparation, starting at the point where preparation actually worked. Short exposures came first. Standing in the cold beside an elder. Walking small distances. Watching without participating. The environment was introduced gently, then repeated, until it stopped feeling foreign. The reason timing mattered had nothing to do with culture and everything to do with the human nervous system. Early in life, the brain is still deciding what counts as danger and what counts as manageable discomfort. Stress responses are not fixed, they're learned. When cold and uncertainty are introduced early, in controlled doses, the body learns that these sensations are intense but survivable. Fear doesn't disappear, but it loses its authority. This early calibration changes everything. Cold becomes familiar instead of shocking. Pain becomes information instead of panic. The mind learns to stay present instead of rushing toward escape. And because these lessons are learned young, they don't feel like skills later on. They feel normal. A boy who grows up functioning under discomfort doesn't need to prove toughness as an adult. He already trusts himself. Starting later would have been far more dangerous. Older beginners brought expectations of comfort with them. Their stress responses were already wired around avoidance. When intense cold finally arrived, the nervous system interpreted it as overwhelming instead of manageable. Panic came faster. Decisions slowed. Energy drained quicker. In a place where hesitation could mean death, that delay wasn't just inefficient, it was lethal. Younger minds adapt faster because they haven't learned fear narratives yet. They don't catastrophize discomfort. They accept difficulty as part of learning rather than evidence of failure. That's why early exposure wasn't seen as harsh. It was seen as efficient. Normalize challenge before fear takes root, and fear never gets to run the system. So this wasn't about rushing childhood or stripping it away. It was about aligning development with reality. The elders weren't trying to create fearless boys. They were shaping calm ones. And calm, in an environment like this, was the most valuable survival trait of all. This quiet, deliberate understanding of human psychology is exactly why stories like this belong on ancient paths of men, where strength is traced back to systems, not slogans. That calm didn't come from forcing children through chaos. It came from something far more deliberate. There is a critical difference between trauma and training, and Inuit elders understood it instinctively. Trauma overwhelms the mind with stress that has no structure, no explanation, and no sense of control. Training does the opposite. Stress was introduced with guidance, with purpose, and with clear boundaries. The boy knew why he was there. He knew what was expected. And most importantly, he knew someone was watching. At no point were boys abandoned to figure it out. They were always with older hunters, men who had already internalized calm under pressure. Every movement was observed. Every reaction was noted. When posture slipped, it was adjusted. When breathing sped up, it was slowed. When fear crept in, it wasn't mocked or punished. It was quietly redirected. The presence of experienced adults transformed stress from danger into instruction. This supervision mattered because it meant mistakes were survivable. A poor decision didn't become a disaster. A misstep didn't spiral into catastrophe. Elders stepped in before errors became fatal, not after. That safety net allowed learning to happen without breaking the child's trust in the world. Stress was real, but it was never allowed to become overwhelming. Over time, this created a powerful internal association. Calmness, not success, was what earned approval. A boy who stayed composed, even if the hunt failed, was seen as progressing. A boy who succeeded but lost emotional control was corrected. This flipped the usual reward system. External results mattered less than internal regulation. And that rewiring lasted far beyond childhood. This is why the experience didn't fracture them. Stress without meaning shatters people. Stress with structure shapes them. The boys weren't being hardened through suffering. They were being trained to remain intact under pressure. And once that skill is learned early, it becomes invisible. It feels like normal life. It feels like steadiness. It feels like knowing you can face what's coming without breaking. Once stress was introduced in a controlled way, cold itself became the next instructor. Cold has a unique effect on the human mind. It demands presence. You cannot drift while exposed to it. You cannot disappear into thought or emotion. The body pulls the mind back again and again into the exact moment it's living in. Every sensation is immediate. Every movement matters. In the cold, dissociation isn't an option. Awareness becomes automatic. This forced presence reshaped attention itself. Daydreaming wastes heat. Distraction leads to mistakes. The mind learns, through repetition, to stay where the body is. Over time, This state stops feeling intense and starts feeling normal. Presence isn't practiced, it's required. And what is required often becomes permanent. Cold also taught emotional discipline without ever naming it. Complaining burned energy that couldn't be replaced easily. Panic tightened muscles, sped breathing, and accelerated heat loss. The environment punished emotional excess instantly and impersonally. Calm, on the other hand, conserved warmth. Slow movements preserved strength. Controlled breathing extended endurance. Emotional regulation stopped being a moral lesson and became a physical advantage. Because the feedback was immediate, the lesson stuck. Boys didn't learn to stay calm because someone told them to. They learned because calm worked. It kept fingers functional. It kept judgment clear. It made survival easier. Over time, emotional restraint stopped feeling like restraint at all. It felt efficient. It felt intelligent. Perhaps the most profound change happened in how pain itself was understood. Cold reframed pain from something to escape into something to interpret. Sharpness meant exposure. Numbness meant danger. Ache meant time was passing. Pain became information, signals to be read calmly, not alarms to be feared. This shift alone altered how the mind responded to hardship for the rest of life. As exposure continued, discomfort lost its novelty. What once felt unbearable became familiar. Familiarity didn't remove difficulty, it removed panic. And when panic disappears, endurance rises naturally. Endurance stops being something you summon and becomes something you expect from yourself. It integrates into identity. By the time these boys grew older, they didn't describe themselves as tough. They didn't think in those terms. They simply knew that discomfort didn't control them. Cold had taught their minds to stay anchored, their emotions to stay efficient, and their bodies to stay responsive under strain. What looked extreme from the outside felt stable on the inside, and that stability followed them everywhere. Over time, the hunt itself became the most powerful training ground of all, not because of danger, but because of what it demanded internally. Hunting required stillness, on a level most people never experience. Long stretches of silence where nothing happened. No movement, no talking, no visible progress. The body had to remain controlled while the mind waited without stimulation. In those moments, impatience wasn't just inconvenient, it was destructive. A single careless shift could undo hours of preparation. This stillness trained something deeper than patience. It trained restraint. The instinct to fidget, to adjust, to fill silence with motion had to be overridden. The body learned to obey the mind, and the mind learned to tolerate waiting without agitation. Modern environments constantly reward stimulation. The hunt did the opposite. It rewarded those who could remain calm in emptiness. Then there was the waiting itself. Hours could pass without a single sign of success. No guarantees. No reassurance. Effort did not promise reward. You could do everything correctly and still come back empty-handed. This was delayed reward training in its purest form. The brain learned to separate effort from outcome, to work steadily without emotional collapse when results didn't arrive. This mattered because easy reward weakens discipline. Guaranteed outcomes create fragile expectations. The hunt stripped those away. It taught boys to commit fully without demanding certainty in return. Over time, patience stopped feeling like restraint and started feeling like competence. They didn't rush because rushing didn't help. They waited because waiting worked. This mattered because easy reward weakens discipline. Guaranteed outcomes create fragile expectations. The hunt stripped those away. It taught boys to commit fully without demanding certainty in return. Over time, patience stopped feeling like restraint and started feeling like competence. They didn't rush because rushing didn't help. They waited because waiting worked. Because responsibility arrived early, it didn't feel heavy later. Boys learned that their actions mattered before ego fully formed. This produced a quiet seriousness, not anxiety, not fear, but awareness. They didn't hunt to prove themselves. They hunted because people depended on them. That kind of responsibility builds focus without breaking confidence. Over time, this combination, stillness, delayed reward, and responsibility, shaped a specific kind of mind. One that could wait without agitation. One that could work without applause. One that could carry weight without resentment. Hunting wasn't just about bringing back food. It was a psychological laboratory, refining attention, discipline, and accountability until they became instinct. What's striking is not what Inuit elders did when boys lost emotional control. It's what they didn't do. There was no yelling, no shaming, no dramatic correction. Emotional explosions weren't treated as offenses that needed punishment. They were treated as noise. The elders didn't escalate, didn't react, didn't feed the moment. They stayed calm. And that calmness quietly removed the fuel from the outburst. Instead of correcting emotions directly, elders modeled the state they expected. Calm behavior wasn't praised loudly. It was simply mirrored. When danger appeared, adults didn't tense theatrically. When conditions worsened, they didn't rush. Their breathing stayed steady. Their movement stayed efficient. Children learned not through instruction, but through immersion. Emotional regulation wasn't explained. It was demonstrated over and over until it became familiar. In that environment, emotional regulation wasn't a moral virtue. It was a survival skill. Fear was never denied. It was acknowledged quietly, then set aside. Anger wasn't punished. It was seen as wasted energy, something that burned warmth without producing results. Control mattered more than dominance. The goal wasn't to overpower emotion, but to prevent it from interfering with judgment. This is where modeling became everything. Boys copied what they saw because what they saw worked. Hunters never dramatized danger. They didn't inflate risk to appear brave, and they didn't minimize it to appear fearless. They treated threats with proportional response, enough attention to act correctly, never enough emotion to lose clarity. Over time, this taught boys that emotional restraint wasn't suppression. It was intelligence. Because this behavior was consistent, it normalized restraint. Emotional control didn't feel exceptional or heroic. It felt standard. Boys grew up surrounded by men who didn't perform their emotions, didn't weaponize them, and didn't let them dominate the moment. What modern people call emotional toughness was simply the default operating state. And this may be the most important part. Emotions weren't eliminated. They were integrated. Fear was allowed to exist without being obeyed. Anger was allowed to pass without being expressed. Confidence emerged not from dominance, but from consistency. By watching this day after day, boys internalized a quiet rule. Your emotions are real, but they do not get to lead. What emerged from all of this wasn't loud toughness or performative resilience. It was stress tolerance that ran deep and quiet. These boys grew into men with unusually high pain thresholds, not because pain disappeared, but because it no longer triggered panic. Cold, fatigue, hunger, and risk registered clearly without overwhelming the system. Under pressure, their thinking stayed intact. Decisions didn't collapse just because conditions worsened. Stress became something to operate within, not something to escape from. Because stress no longer hijacked the mind, panic responses stayed low. Fear didn't spike into chaos. Pain didn't spiral into urgency. The body responded proportionally instead of explosively. This stability made decision-making reliable even when margins were thin. In environments where one wrong move could end everything, that steadiness was the difference between survival and disappearance. From repeated exposure came something modern culture often tries to manufacture artificially: self-trust. Not confidence built from praise, encouragement, or external validation, but confidence built from proof. These men trusted themselves because they had seen themselves function when it mattered. They had stayed calm in cold that shut others down. They had endured discomfort without breaking focus. Survival itself became evidence. This kind of self-trust doesn't inflate the ego. It does the opposite. There's no need to announce capability when you've already tested it. No need to posture when confidence is internal. Strength becomes something you carry, not something you display. These men didn't need to prove themselves in conversation because reality had already done it for them. That's why confidence expressed itself quietly. No boasting, no dominance displays, no emotional noise. Competence spoke through action, not language. When danger appeared, there was movement. When conditions worsened, there was adjustment. When others panicked, there was steadiness. Calm wasn't a personality trait. It was the visible surface of deep internal regulation. This is the kind of mental toughness that doesn't burn out. It doesn't rely on adrenaline. It doesn't collapse when things go wrong. It holds under pressure because it was built under pressure. What looks extreme from the outside produced men who were psychologically stable, emotionally contained, and deeply capable, exactly what survival in that world demanded. What made all of this work wasn't any single practice on its own. It was alignment. Culture, environment, and training all pointed in the same direction. There was no contradiction between what boys were taught and what reality demanded of them. Calm was valued because calm worked. Endurance was respected because endurance mattered. Nothing in their upbringing suggested that comfort was a right or that hardship was unfair. The world behaved exactly as they had been prepared for it to behave. Because there were no mixed messages, the mind didn't fracture. Boys weren't told one thing and shown another. They weren't praised for fragility and then punished for it later. Every signal reinforced the same lesson. Stay steady, stay aware, stay useful. That consistency is rare, and it matters more than intensity. When values and reality align, the nervous system doesn't have to constantly recalibrate. It settles. Because there were no mixed messages, the mind didn't fracture. Boys weren't told one thing and shown another. They weren't praised for fragility and then punished for it later. Every signal reinforced the same lesson. Stay steady, stay aware, stay useful. That consistency is rare, and it matters more than intensity. When values and reality align, the nervous system doesn't have to constantly recalibrate. It settles. This context is what prevented trauma. Stress without explanation overwhelms the mind. Stress with meaning becomes tolerable. The boys understood why they were cold. They understood why the hunt mattered. They understood who depended on them. That understanding anchored them emotionally. The mind can endure far more when it knows the reason. And then there was the community itself. No one endured alone. Boys were surrounded by people who had already walked the path they were on. Belonging buffered fear. Shared hardship built trust faster than comfort ever could. When everyone faced the same conditions, no one felt singled out or abandoned. Struggle wasn't isolating, it was communal. This collective endurance created something subtle but powerful. Emotional safety inside physical danger. Even when conditions were brutal, boys knew they were part of something larger than themselves. That sense of belonging stabilized the nervous system. Fear shrinks when you're not facing it alone. Trust grows when hardship is shared rather than hidden. So the system worked not because it was harsh, but because it was coherent. Everything reinforced everything else. Meaning gave hardship shape. Community absorbed stress. Consistency trained calm. And over time, that coherence produced exactly what the environment demanded. Men who could endure difficulty without being damaged by it. When you step back from all of this, the contrast with modern life becomes uncomfortable. Somewhere along the way, comfort started to replace care. Discomfort began to look like failure instead of preparation. Stress was treated as something to eliminate rather than something to understand. But removing stress doesn't build strength. It removes the chance to develop it. Avoidance feels protective in the moment, yet over time it produces fragility. A nervous system that never learns controlled strain interprets even minor pressure as threat. Because comfort is easier to provide than responsibility. Responsibility keeps getting delayed. Children are shielded longer, trusted later, and tested less. Skills that require pressure, decision-making, emotional regulation, endurance, aren't practiced until life forces them to be. By then, the stakes are higher and the foundation is weaker. Anxiety fills the gap where competence should have formed, not because people are incapable, but because they were never allowed to practice being capable under strain. This delay changes how the mind interprets stress. When responsibility arrives late and suddenly, it feels overwhelming instead of familiar. The nervous system treats pressure as danger rather than as a signal to focus. Tasks that should feel demanding but manageable instead feel threatening. What could have been learned gradually now arrives all at once. Modern life hasn't removed stress. It has only changed its shape. Deadlines replace storms. Financial pressure replaces hunger. Social judgment replaces physical danger. The stakes are different, but the nervous system responds the same way. Yet instead of training for this reality, we design systems that try to buffer it away entirely. When stress inevitably breaks through, we're surprised by how badly it lands. So we medicate what earlier cultures trained. We label pressure as pathology instead of preparation. We treat resilience as an exception instead of a baseline. This isn't a moral failure. It's a misunderstanding of how humans adapt. The Inuit didn't raise boys to suffer. They raised them to function. And that distinction explains everything. What this reveals is not that the past was superior, but that it was honest about reality. Stress exists whether we acknowledge it or not. The only choice is whether we meet it prepared or unprepared. The Inuit chose preparation. Modern society often chooses insulation. And the psychological consequences of that choice are now everywhere. At this point, it's important to slow down, because this is where people often reach the wrong conclusion. None of this is a call for cruelty. None of it justifies abuse. Inuit training was not about overwhelming children with suffering and hoping they survived it. Abuse is unstructured pain with no explanation, no protection, and no exit. What happened here was the opposite. Context mattered. Guidance mattered. Meaning mattered. Stress was never dumped onto a child without preparation or support. This is also why the method itself can't simply be copied. Cold was the tool, not the goal. The Arctic happened to be the environment they lived in, so it became the training ground. But the real objective was psychological calibration, teaching the nervous system how to operate under strain. Stress was measured. Exposure increased gradually. Support never disappeared. Remove those elements, and the system stops working. And while the environment was ancient, the principle isn't. Modern equivalents exist everywhere. Controlled difficulty. Responsibility paired with guidance. Real consequences contained within safe boundaries. These don't require ice or starvation. They require intention. They require resisting the urge to remove every obstacle before growth has a chance to occur. The lesson here isn't to recreate the past. It's to understand what the past understood clearly. Resilience doesn't emerge from comfort alone, and protection without preparation leaves people exposed later. Strength grows when challenge is introduced carefully, explained honestly, and supported consistently. This is the line that matters most. Cross it, and you get harm. Respect it, and you get growth. The Inuit knew where that line was, not because they were harsh, but because their survival depended on getting it right. By the time you reach the end of this story, the question has changed. It's no longer about why hardship existed. It's about whether hardship itself was misunderstood. What if it wasn't cruelty? What if it wasn't neglect? What if, in a world where survival was never guaranteed, hardship was one of the few reliable gifts adults could give their children, preparation for reality, not protection from it? Because when you strip away the shock, something else becomes clear. Modern societies work relentlessly to shield children from discomfort, stress, and pressure. And yet stress still finds them. Fear still arrives. Responsibility still comes. The difference is timing. Instead of being introduced early, slowly, and with guidance, it often arrives all at once, late, unannounced, and overwhelming. The protection was real. The preparation was missing. So the uncomfortable possibility emerges. What if we've been protecting children from the wrong things? Not danger, but competence. Not hardship, but self-trust. By removing every obstacle, every strain, every moment of controlled difficulty, we may have unintentionally removed the chance to learn how to stand steady when pressure shows up anyway. The Inuit didn't believe fear could be erased. They assumed it would come. Cold would come. Hunger would come. Uncertainty would come. Their question wasn't how to prevent these things, but how to make sure a child didn't collapse when they did. So they trained calm. They normalized discomfort. They built trust in the self long before the world demanded it. And that's the part that lingers. They didn't raise boys to be fearless. Fearlessness was never the goal. They raised boys to stay calm when fear arrived, to think clearly, to move deliberately, and to remain intact under pressure. That ability didn't look dramatic. It didn't announce itself, but it endured. That skill, quiet, unglamorous, deeply practical, is rare now. Not because humans changed, but because training changed. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The question isn't whether the world is still harsh. It is. The question is whether we're still teaching people how to remain steady inside it.